CAE Result Students' Book by Cathy Good and Mary Stevens. Published and copyright Oxford University Press 2006. Unit 1, page 14. Listening. Exercise 2. 1.
I got so carried away with it all.
2.
I'd been made redundant.
3.
I was babbling on about my workload.
4.
There was a real mixed bag of us.
5.
You could have knocked me down with a feather.
6.
I was at a bit of a loose end.
7.
I'd been having a bit of a rough time work-wise.
Exercise 3. Speaker 1.
I ended up doing a photography course at the local college. Earlier in the year, I'd been made redundant, and I was at a bit of a loose end, so it was my birthday present to myself. I was a bit apprehensive about going along alone, but I'm an outgoing type, and there was a real mixed bag of us, from beginners to those who'd been doing it for years. For me, it was like a second childhood. In the first 6 weeks, I'd taken about 100 photographs. I've even exhibited some. Now it's not just a hobby. It's a totally compulsive activity for me.
Speaker 2.
I'd been having a bit of a rough time work-wise. I'd been sketching for years, so a friend suggested I should go on a fine arts course, which included mosaic making. Eventually, I booked myself onto one, but I was terrified I wouldn't be as good as everyone else. As it turned out, I needn't have worried because everyone worked at their own pace. Anyway, I produced this weird, abstract mosaic. It started out as a kind of nightmare scenario, very gloomy. Then I slowly added more colour, realising that the depressing thoughts that had originally bothered me enough to inspire the design no longer mattered to me so much. It finished up being rather like therapy.
Speaker 3.
I was getting over an operation and felt the need to be out and about. As luck would have it, I saw a paintballing centre advertised in the local newspaper. Just what I need, I thought. A nice bit of physical activity and fun at the weekends. Not that I was keen on sports, but I thought, why not? Well, I got so carried away with it all that I decided to try and get into the local team. Well, you've guessed it, I didn't exactly become a megastar overnight. But there's always next season. In the meantime, I'm starting to enjoy other kinds of sports, and I've become much more determined to win too.
Speaker 4.
Now, there's no way I'm mechanically minded, but I decided I needed a little diversification in my life. I certainly didn't need an activity to take me away from a desk job. I'm a climbing instructor, but I happened to see an old Volkswagen Beetle advertised in the window of our local newsagent's and decided to take a look at it. It was a bit of a wreck, but I bought it anyway. Well, you should have seen it when I'd finished working on it. Restored to its former glory, it's a real collector's piece. I think what I discovered from the experience was a completely different side of myself. A side I never even knew I had.
Speaker 5.
I've always been into music. I play the guitar and sing. I even worked as a DJ in Spain once. Well, one day I was babbling on about my workload when my brother suggested I recorded a CD. I thought he was mad, but I didn't want to upset him by saying so. Well, that was it. My first CD took me 18 months to record. I even wrote the songs myself. I suppose a professional singer would pick up on the flaws. Anyway, I sent it to a couple of record companies, never really thinking anyone would listen to it or that it would eventually make me as much money as it did. You could have knocked me down with a feather when one of them contacted me to say they were interested. It certainly inspired me to do some more recordings.
Page 15. Speaking. Exercise 2. 1.
What do you do?
At the moment, I do a part-time job.
2.
How long have you been living here?
I'm here for 6 years.
3.
What do you enjoy doing in your spare time?
I'm enjoying going to the cinema.
4.
How would you describe yourself?
I think I'm having an outgoing character.
5.
What did you do last summer?
I've visited the mountains.
Exercise 4.
Now, I'd like you to ask each other something about your leisure activities.
What are your leisure activities?
I don't know really. Maybe tennis and watching TV. What about you? What are yours?
Nothing much. I like the cinema.
Exercise 6.
How important do you think it is to learn another language?
Oh, from my point of view, it's absolutely essential. We live in an international community nowadays, and we can communicate with people on the other side of the world in a matter of minutes. But, in my opinion, learning another language isn't just useful or even fascinating. I personally feel that it's also a mark of respect for the people you're communicating with.
Unit 2. Page 21. Lead-in. Exercise 3.
Last year, I travelled to Ypres in Belgium to pay a visit to the famous Cat Festival, which is held there on the second Sunday in May. Kattenwoensdag, which translates as Cat Wednesday, was introduced over 2 centuries ago. The story behind the festival is an interesting one. At that time, Ypres was an important centre for the wool trade. The wool was collected together in the town's huge cloth hall before it was sold. It attracted a lot of hungry rodents, so cats were used to control their numbers. The cats subsequently bred and eventually became a nuisance and had to be got rid of. Nowadays, the cats used in the festival are toys, and the event is enhanced by parades celebrating famous cats. The festival was well worth the visit. It was extremely colourful and there was a fantastic atmosphere. What particularly attracted me was the parade of bands and beautifully decorated carnival floats with so many different themes which passed through the town. This was followed later on by a magnificent firework display on the town ramparts. But before that, it had unfortunately started to rain by then, but it didn't seem to make any difference to the spectators. A jester appeared on the Cloth Hall Tower and began to toss toy cats to the crowd below. Everyone scrambled to pick them up as a souvenir, but I decided it would be much safer to buy one later at the tourist office to remind me of the event.
I was working in Valencia when a friend told me about a festival called La Tomatina. Apparently, it has its origins in the 1940s, when a group of friends started an impromptu fight with some tomatoes. Passers-by joined in, and the fiesta has continued to grow ever since. When my friend told me that you can expect upwards of 20,000 combatants to take part, double the town's population, I decided that this was something I had to see. I quickly found out that there are no alliances at La Tomatina. It's just the biggest food fight in the world. The only rules are that you must squash the tomatoes in your hand before you throw them, and, if you can, hit a tourist, especially one with a camera. The ammunition was delivered to the square in the back of trucks to the accompaniment of the cheering crowds who'd been gathering since early morning. Once the signal had been given for hostilities to commence, it took just 30 minutes and a lot of screaming for 45,000 kilos of tomatoes to become a sticky, slimy mush. By the time it was all over, the streets were running red with tomato juice, and we all looked like extras from a particularly violent movie. Luckily, the town put up temporary public showers near the river so that we could rinse off the debris. It was certainly an experience to remember.
Page 26. Listening. Exercise 2.
This morning we'll be paying a visit to the Museum of the Native American. Many people feel a museum like this should have been created long ago to recognize the vital contributions Native people have made to contemporary American culture and art. The exhibits inside were put together with collaboration from 24 tribes and Native communities. But this didn't happen overnight, or even in a matter of months. The museum project itself took a staggering 15 years to finalize. In the early 1990s, dialogues with Native communities began. These meetings resulted in the museum's landmark charter, which was drawn up in 1993. As it was a document which represented the involvement of the different communities in the project, it was aptly entitled The Way of the People. It aimed to reach beyond the basic requirements of a museum to incorporate Native sensibilities throughout the building. So, what you are going to see this morning is a truly dazzling display of Native American culture. The official opening of the museum was certainly an occasion to remember. 500 different groups of tribal people from all over the Western Hemisphere, and some from as far away as the Pacific Islands, joined the ceremonial procession to celebrate the event. In their buckskin and feathers, T-shirts and jeans, they marched to the sound of drums and flutes. They then joined in the First Americans Festival, which took place outside the museum. As you will see, the museum is housed in a sand-colored, rock-faced building. According to the architect, this is meant to recall the natural world the original Native Americans inhabited. It suggests a formation sculptured by the wind. The building is a living museum in close proximity to nature. To reinforce this concept, it has a dome which opens to reveal the sky, representing the outdoor life of Native Americans on the plains. The building itself faces the rising sun. Now, when we arrive, we'll have a guided tour. Then there'll be an hour or so for you to have lunch and enjoy the numerous facilities. For those of you who might be feeling peckish, there's the Mitsetom Cafe. The translation of the name sounds as if it might be time to sit down, but the name means, rather more aptly, let's eat. That's located on the museum's ground level. It offers meals and snacks based on the indigenous foods and culinary traditions of the Americas, so it's well worth a visit. There are also 2 museum stores. The Chesapeake Museum store has a wide range of jewelry, textiles, and other works by Native artists. It's linked by a 20-foot-tall totem pole, carved by artist Nathan Jackson, with the second level's Roanoke store, which is just beside what's known as the Potomac Staircase. Finally, if you care to venture outside, you'll see that a forest walk runs along the northern edge of the museum site. More than 25 tree species are planted there. Don't miss the stunning maple and oak trees. Again, this idea is in keeping with the original thinking behind the design of the museum, because forests provided indigenous cultures with important materials for shelter, firewood, and medicines. So, let's go inside.
Page 27. Speaking. Exercise 3.
Well, in this, the students are getting a degree. They're proud, that's sure. Yes, proud. And in this picture, this person, I think, is nervous. Yes, maybe nervous that something might go wrong. This picture looks as if it's the Olympic Games ceremony. Yes, it's the Olympic Games. Well, these people might be feeling apprehensive about whether they're going to win or lose. But they might also be feeling emotional because they are taking part in such a wonderful ceremony. That's all, I think.
Unit 3. Page 38. Listening. Exercise 2.
There's a lot of discussion nowadays about what lies in store for old buildings and monuments. Now, you're both involved in looking after places like these. Bob, what do you think is the best way of going about this so they don't suffer unduly from the rising number of tourists visiting them?
Well, one of the ways that you can do this is to build a tourist centre. About 13 years ago, a firm of architects won a competition to design a new tourist centre for one of Britain's most prestigious ancient monuments, Stonehenge. There's no shortage of financial backing, but the centre is still in the pipeline, and the debate over what exactly it should offer visitors thunders on. Most people, and that includes me, start to ask themselves, who is it for? How accessible should it be? Will it simply encourage even more visitors to come to the site? And so on.
Indeed. Personally, I feel we should do something quite dramatic, like forget the whole thing. Close all the existing visitor facilities at Stonehenge and remove any references to those famous standing stones from all the tourist literature. In other words, leave the place alone for anyone who happens to come along to discover it for the first time, as it were.
Great plan, but totally unrealistic, of course, and Carrie knows that only too well. That's because the tourist industry is an invaluable revenue earner, so there's no way that's ever going to happen. Everyone's well aware that some kind of money-spinning centre is on the cards. The point is that Stonehenge is one of those sites that just has to be visited. Petra is another. The Rose-Red City is one of the world's most alluring tourist sites. It's a truly magical place.
It certainly is, and so, of course, is Stonehenge. But apart from being a must for travellers, there are so many other similarities between the two sites. One of the most significant, in my opinion, is that they could both be overwhelmed by visitors in the future. There are plans to build a tourist centre at Petra too, a $5 million visitor and interpretation centre. The project's been controversial, but what they're going to try and do is tuck the centre into the surrounding hills. Apparently it won't dominate the entrance to Petra. It'll lead visitors gently in and out of the site without in any way damaging it.
I agree that the Petra project certainly is an impressive one, but what appeals to me most about it is the fact that it'll offer tourists a more in-depth look at the site. Too many tourists arrive at a place of interest, pay their sometimes exorbitant entrance fee, then make a dash for the main attractions. They often miss out on the carefully thought-out displays designed to give them an idea of why the place was built, what role it had in history, what kind of people lived there, what their daily life was like.
I hope it succeeds in getting that message across to visitors. But from what I've read about the project, the aim seems to be to maintain the aura of Petra as a lost city, a place to be discovered. Again, it's a bit like Stonehenge in this respect, and the people I've talked to about the plans for Petra certainly feel that it should reveal its secrets slowly, rather than all at once, to its numerous visitors. It should keep that vital element of dramatic surprise, so that the visitor never knows what's round the corner. I think if the project manages to achieve that, despite all the publicity surrounding it, and ensures that the vast numbers of tourists don't damage it forever, it will have been very successful indeed.
Absolutely. It would certainly be a tragedy if places like these weren't protected in some way. And I suppose I have to admit that building something like a visitor centre is one way of ensuring that places like these do survive intact. And in the long run, it's up to every one of us to make sure that they do.
Bob, Carrie, thanks for sharing your views with us this evening.
Page 39. Speaking. Exercise 3. You will each have the same set of pictures to look at, but your pictures are in a different order. They show people with ambitions for the future. Please do not show your pictures to each other. Marissa, I'd like you to describe 2 of these pictures, saying what ambitions the people might have for the future and how difficult it might be to fulfill their ambitions. Exercise 4.
I'm going to choose this picture of singers and this one here of the runner. In this picture, there are young people. They're singing, maybe at school. I think they might want to be singers. I don't think this is difficult. In fact, it might be quite easy for them to do this. In the other picture, I can see a girl in a race, perhaps in a stadium. Maybe she wants to be an athlete. She can be, I think. It's possible. Anything's possible.
Unit 4. Page 50. Listening. Exercise 2.
Good afternoon and welcome. I gather all of you are interested in becoming wildlife photographers, so I've brought along some of the pictures I took on two of my most interesting assignments. The first was to South Africa, where I went last year. It's probably one of the best places in the world to be if you're a wildlife photographer. And the second was on my most recent trip to the Amazon, where the wildlife is also amazing. I'll let you see these later, but first of all, I'd like to tell you what being a wildlife photographer entails. Every day, I get emails from people asking me what they have to do to become a professional wildlife photographer. Some of these emails come from young school children doing projects about a future career they would be interested in taking up. But most of these requests come from school leavers seriously thinking about a career as a wildlife photographer. Usually my first reaction is, I don't know. But of course, this doesn't help. It does, however, indicate that there is no easy answer to this question. It is actually incredibly difficult to become more than a part-time freelancer. There are so many amateurs flooding the market with really good quality pictures that it's very hard to make a living as a professional. Most of the famous professionals in wildlife photography never had any formal training. Arthur Morris, probably the best-known bird photographer, had been a teacher for years before going full-time into photography. I've only once met anyone with any kind of formal training. He attended a university in England where he did a degree in what's called biology imaging. That's a combination of biology and photography, filming and drawing. And he still ended up working as a safari guide. The best way to get yourself into the profession is to do it alongside a job that brings you as close as possible to your subjects. This could be as a conservationist or travel guide. Then, while photographing, you can slowly start selling pictures while your experience and expertise grows. After a few years, you might decide that you can give up the other job. One thing many people overlook is that once you are a professional, it's no longer about taking great pictures because you love it. It's about earning enough money to compensate for all the expenses, such as equipment, films, processing, travel, etc., and making a living. This puts quite a few people off. But you have to remember that you will not only be marketing your pictures, but in a way, also yourself. So if you're wondering what subject would be best to take at university, forget about creative subjects and take business. You'll certainly find it useful. Now, if you'd like to take a look at these pictures...
Speaking. Exercise 1.
Imagine you are writing a website article about the importance of animals in people's lives. Here are some pictures you are considering using to illustrate the article. Talk to each other about how important the animals are to the people in these situations. Then choose 2 pictures which would best illustrate the article.
Exercise 3.
So we have to choose 2 pictures to illustrate the website article. I think these 2 are the best. What about you?
I think we should talk about the pictures first. Let's begin with this one. Now, it seems to be a walk-through aquarium. I think it's called a walk-through aquarium, and some children are visiting it.
Yes, I agree, but I think...
No, wait a minute. It could be that it's a party of school children and it's an educational visit to find out about wildlife. It could be that the class is doing a project on marine life or something like that. I think the fish might be really important in this situation. I mean, the children couldn't do the project without actually going to see them.
Maybe not, but what about the photo of the couple with a pet cat?
Oh, the pet cat! Now, that's a good picture to illustrate the importance of animals, because pets make some people really happy. Some people would find it difficult to manage without them. Yes, that's definitely worth considering, but let's talk about the other pictures.
Unit 5. Page 62. Listening. Exercise 3.
Today is the first day of spring. The birds are singing, and the clocks went forward an hour this morning. The arrival of spring will give you more time to enjoy the daffodils and crocuses, but losing that hour's sleep today will probably leave you feeling more grumpy and sleep-deprived than ever. Waking up feeling worse than you did when you went to bed is fairly common, and although this may not happen to the majority of us, a quarter of us are likely to suffer from some form of sleeping difficulty at one time or another. The Chartered Society of Physiotherapy is this week producing a guide to getting a good night's sleep. Amongst other things, it outlines the position people adopt when they go to sleep, and explains how this can make the difference between waking up refreshed or exhausted. According to Sammy, a physiotherapist who has helped to produce the guide, if you've had a bad night's sleep, as the day progresses you know something's wrong, because you soon begin to feel your energy levels slump. So the right kind of sleep is absolutely vital, because it helps our minds and bodies function properly. This is particularly noticeable in the case of parents who struggle to get off to sleep again after being woken in the night by newborn babies. Constantly getting in and out of bed disturbs both the physical and the mental pattern of your sleep. This is reflected in the fact that physiotherapists are getting more and more used to seeing patients in their clinics who have sustained injuries as a result of getting into bed and falling asleep in an awkward position. While Sammy acknowledges the importance of choosing good pillows and mattresses, he insists that looking after your back is the key factor. For example, if you sleep on your back, he suggests putting a pillow under your knees because that will take some pressure off the lower back and spine. But there are other reasons for not getting a good night's sleep. Research shows that although more than 2/3 of children in this country read a book or magazine to help them relax before they go to sleep, they are also spending far too long at the computer in their bedroom before they go to bed, and as a result are not getting enough sleep. So how can adults and children ensure that they get the sleep they need? Well, they can prepare for this not, as you might imagine, by having an early night, but by organizing a routine, such as a set bedtime or always having a bath before going to bed. This will put them in the right frame of mind for the kind of sleep that will see them successfully through the next day.
Speaking. Exercise 2.
I'd like you to imagine that the government is producing a leaflet to help young people stay fit and healthy. Here are some pictures they're considering including in the leaflet. Talk together about how successful these pictures might be in encouraging young people to stay fit and healthy, then decide which one should be on the cover of the leaflet.
Unit 6. Page 74. Listening. Exercise 2.
Some years ago, record producer Frank Farian discovered Robert Pilatus and Fabrice Morvan, otherwise known as Rob and Fab, in Munich. Impressed by their charisma and chiselled good looks, Farian formed them into pop group Milli Vanilli. Their success was almost instantaneous. They rocketed to stardom on the strength of 2 hit singles. Their debut album sold over 7 million copies, and they won a major music award as Best New Artist. But there was an ugly truth lurking behind the attractive facade presented by the duo. They possessed no musical abilities whatsoever. They couldn't play instruments, write music, or even sing. All of their songs had been created in a studio by professional musicians. Whenever they performed on stage, they simply mimed or lip-synced the words. Embarrassed by the situation, Rob and Fab confronted Farian and insisted that he allow them to sing on their next album. However, following a supposedly live performance on MTV, when the record they were miming to jumped, Farian revealed that their act was a sham. The news rocked the music industry. The media latched onto the story with a passion, and they were stripped of their award. For many, Rob and Fab's deception was a perfect representation of the artificial, pre-packaged nature of the pop music industry itself.
Exercise 3. Speaker 1.
Well, some pop groups do lip sync and manage not to look awkward, but it's a dangerous game. One singer famously mimed out of sync because she couldn't hear her band's live backing track. But whether this should happen is debatable. If you purchase very expensive tickets for a live performance, you expect just that. Otherwise, it's a fraud. You might as well just listen to the CD at home instead of travelling to the show. If they say on their advertising that it's mimed, then that's fair enough. We can make our choice based on information. Mostly it's about poor singers who can't perform live, and that's the difference between studio singers and great and long-lasting talent.
Speaker 2.
I appreciate the fact that artists like Britney Spears have active dance routines to perform, and therefore think this justifies them miming. But if you went to a musical and the performers simply mimed to a backing track, you'd demand your money back. Considering the expense and difficulty of getting tickets to these concerts, not to mention the expectation that you're going to see your favourite artist sing live, that's what you should get. I think it is absolutely outrageous when so-called pop stars mime in front of hundreds of fans. You can pay a fortune to see such artists perform. The least they can do is sing live.
Speaker 3.
Singers who can't sing live highlight all that's wrong with the music industry. It's an industry full of manufactured bands and artists whose records are sold purely on their appearance, not their musical ability. I have a lot of respect for artists like Beyoncé, who are amazing live and obviously very talented. In my opinion, if you can't perform live, you aren't a musician. I feel very dejected that the music industry is no longer about talent. It's all about, if your face fits, your voice can always be altered to make it sound good. You never hear of opera singers miming, so why should pop stars be able to get away with it?
Speaker 4.
Last week I went to see a group of amateurs performing a musical. The performers all had small mics taped to them, and they sang and danced fantastically well at the same time. You'd never have guessed these people were amateurs, and were fitting all this in with their day jobs. If they can perform so expertly for free, then pop stars should be able to do it for the thousands they're paid. And if artists can't perform live on TV, they should show a video instead. If performers can't do everything live, they should work on their act more until they can. Anyone who's a singer-dancer should be able to do both without miming. If they can't, they're cheating the audience.
Speaker 5.
Music hasn't really been live for years. It's usually from a backing track and often performed by computer, so why should anyone expect singing to be live as well? When you buy pop music, you aren't buying music, but an eye-catching, shiny plastic package conforming to the styles and stereotypes of the day. The press really needs to give up this lip-syncing coverage. If artists who do amazing dance routines sang live, they would sound winded and out of tune. It would be impossible to dance like they do and sing so that it sounds as good as their recordings. The fact that some lip-syncing may take place...
Unit 7, page 86. Listening. Exercise 3.
You have to be dedicated if you want to make a living searching for sunken treasure. And the case of the search for a ship called the Douro is a good example of this. The Douro was a steam-powered ship constructed in Scotland. She was a lavishly fitted, extremely elegant steamship, considered the shining star of the transatlantic lines. Her sheer luxuriousness was matched only by her reputation for reliability and speed. That is, until her 62nd and last voyage between Brazil and England in 1882. During her relatively brief life, her voyages took her to the West Indies and South America. Most of those on board could afford first-class accommodation, but the ship also carried 32nd and 33rd class passengers, as well as 80 officers and crew. On the night disaster struck, she was 2 days out of the port of Lisbon, and most of her passengers were asleep. The fourth officer had identified the light of another ship some 2 miles in the distance, but was confident that the chief officer on the bridge was keeping a close watch on it. Tragically, the chief officer saw it too late to avoid the collision, and the oncoming ship gouged out 2 deep holes in the Dooro's side. Emergency procedures were begun immediately. Amazingly, almost everyone on board survived, because the passenger's safety was put before salvaging her valuable cargo. With the Dooro going down rapidly, there was no time to rescue the treasures on board, and within half an hour she sank to her final resting place on the ocean floor, where she remained undisturbed for the next 114 years. It wasn't until the 1990s that the wreck was finally located with the help of modern technology and the assistance of a fisherman who had spent all his life fishing in the area and knew it well. Initially, the ship that was discovered did not seem to be the one they were looking for. It was only when someone came across a dinner plate sticking out of the mud that they realized it was actually the Dooro. The name of the ship on the plate confirmed this. In addition to valuable artifacts, the salvagers discovered thousands of gold coins. By law, the treasure had to be declared to the proper authorities, and the salvagers had to wait a year and a day before they could claim it as their own. It may not be every day that the ocean floor gives up its secrets, but when it does, it is worth waiting for.
Unit 8, page 93. Lead-in. Exercise 3. A.
The trouble is that it's not simply a question of handing out vast sums of money. The whole concept of aid is an extremely complex one. It's different, of course, if there's been some kind of natural disaster, like a flood or drought. Aid has to be something tangible in cases like these, and it has to arrive quickly. But in the long term, giving money is not necessarily a good idea. So, we have to work out how we can best help people in need. Some of the best aid programs are those which concentrate on showing people how they can better their own situation themselves. For example, by showing them new farming techniques, or setting up small businesses which provide work for the local population. These schemes often produce extremely beneficial results which last.
B.
With hindsight, people come out with statements like, school days are the best days of your life, and so on. But at the time, it often doesn't seem like that. Many young people can't wait to leave school and start earning a living. So, in a way, we have to educate them to understand the value of education, if you see what I mean. Perhaps the mistake we've made is to set up an educational system which is too academic. Maybe it should be more practically orientated. But the problem with that is that it pushes you in a certain direction at a very early age, and then you're locked into a career path you might regret later on.
C.
I once saw a film about a machine capable of controlling the whole human race. At the time, we all thought this was pure fantasy, but I'm not so sure now. We know that the power of the human brain will always exceed that of any machine, simply because it has logic. But we tend to rely more and more on technology to do what for us would be extremely time-consuming activities. I sometimes wonder if our brains will simply stop working because they haven't got enough to occupy them. I know it seems a bit far-fetched, but maybe it could happen.
Page 98. Listening. Exercise 2.
Today we have in the studio Tom Davies, who has recently returned from a year's stint working as a volunteer in Nepal. Tom, welcome.
Hi.
Now, what originally motivated you to take a year out and spend that time living and working in what to most people would be a rather isolated part of the world?
Well, I suppose I'd been thinking about doing something of the kind for quite a long time, actually. I felt that I should be trying to put something back into the world, rather than just keep on taking what I wanted from it. Anyway, one day I picked up a newspaper that someone had left on the train, and I saw this advert. In the blurb it said something like, volunteers return to their own country equipped with invaluable professional experience, a wealth of memories, and a whole new perspective on life. I decided that it was the job for me.
But it must have been difficult, leaving family and friends behind for that length of time?
Of course it was, but as far as I'm concerned, when you're young, you don't dwell on things like that. You look upon life as a bit of an adventure, and you tend to think, a year, it'll be over in no time at all. And it was, in a funny sort of way. Plus the fact that it was so far away, there's no way I could just nip back home for the odd weekend. As it turned out, I was so busy that I don't think I would have had time to do that anyway. Much better to take advantage of my free time to explore my surroundings, which I did to the full.
Now, for those listeners who know very little about the organisation you were working for, is the work really voluntary?
Inasmuch as you're not paid a salary, yes, it is. But that doesn't mean that you're expected to live on nothing. There are lots of benefits on offer. You get a living allowance, accommodation, insurance and flights, all paid for. You're also given individual training, support and advice before your departure. You have the chance to do some networking with other volunteers too. But what clinched it for me was the fact that when you come back to your own country, you get additional support in the form of grants and advice to help you settle back in.
And did you have any choice in what kind of placement you were given?
Oh, absolutely. There were no nasty shocks in that respect. I was a volunteer in Nepal with an organisation which aimed to achieve conservation through human development. This was right up my street. While a colleague, who later became my best mate, and I were working there, we developed our own programme. It was a real challenge. Our aims were twofold. One was to reduce the numbers of snow leopards lost because of illegal hunting. But at the same time, we set out to increase incomes and opportunities for the local communities living in the area.
That sounds like a tall order.
Indeed. Snow leopards are a flagship species for biodiversity in the Himalayas, and they're one of the world's most endangered cat species. Hunting them is prohibited, but residents view them as a pest because they kill large numbers of livestock each year.
And how did your programme help tackle these difficulties?
Well, we tackled both issues simultaneously by introducing livestock insurance for farmers and also through the creation of savings and credit groups. The two projects were deliberately linked to allow profits from the savings credits groups to be used in compensation for livestock losses. Donors provided the initial grant and funding for the project, but the project itself is owned and run by the local community. This means that the scheme is self-financing, and the community makes the decisions. Local people can now borrow money to develop business or enterprises.
Can you give us an example?
Certainly. One that springs to mind was the purchase of cheese-making equipment. Local milk is now converted into cheese to be sold to trekkers who pass through the area. We hope all this will ultimately help the snow leopard, but at the moment it's difficult to determine if there has been a decrease in the number of snow leopard deaths due to poaching. But what we can say for certain is that many of the herders have started to insure their herd against loss. What we are counting on is that profits from the scheme can be put back into community projects and veterinary services, which will benefit the whole region.
And your own plans for the future?
No more travelling for me for a while, that's for sure, unless it's on holiday. I've done what I set out to do, and I'm more than happy with that. But I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Tom, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. So, thank you.
Page 99. Speaking. Exercise 1.
Here are some pictures showing decisions we might have to make at some time in our lives. Talk to each other about how difficult it is to make decisions like these and decide which two decisions have the greatest long-term effect on our lives.
Exercise 3. 1.
It's something that influences everything we do. After all, if we really can't afford to do something, then there's very little point wasting time wondering whether to do it or not.
2.
Probably very trivial everyday decisions. Really important ones are usually much easier to make because there's so much at stake. So you think about them in a more logical way. They're not made on the spur of the moment.
3.
It's easy for me to make up my mind.
4.
I am very interested in money. I would like to be very rich one day. I would like to buy lots of houses and cows.
5.
I would say that some, maybe not so important ones, we do make entirely on our own, and we have the freedom to choose. But others are influenced by friends, family, people at work, or just circumstances in general.
6.
That's an interesting question. Yes, there are plenty of opportunities to make a decision. I agree with them.
Unit 9, page 110. Listening. Exercise 5.
One of the most famous attempted robberies ever to take place in London was at the Millennium Dome on the banks of the River Thames. The attempt, which became known as the Millennium Dome Heist, was simple but audacious, and it had all the trappings of a James Bond film. Had the plan succeeded, it would have been the biggest raid in the world. A gang of criminals had been conspiring for months to snatch the Millennium Jewels, which were on display in the dome. The thieves' plan was to smash their way into the dome with a bulldozer, break through the security glass at the display, and steal a dozen extremely rare and valuable diamonds, including the Millennium Star. The flawless, pear-shaped Millennium Star is arguably the most perfect large diamond in the world, and the third largest ever discovered. The collection was later valued at over 500 million euros. The thieves would then escape down the River Thames in a high-powered speedboat. The men behind the raid were well-known criminals that the police had been investigating for a series of unsuccessful robberies, but instead of arresting them, the police decided to wait for them to strike again, and placed one of the ringleaders under surveillance. Instead of planning another raid as expected, he led officers to the dome, where he paid particular attention to the items on display. In the event, he did not take part in the raid itself, but was a key member of the team as he supplied the vehicles. Officers believe it would have been almost impossible for the robbery to take place without his help. Having realized that the dome could be a target and that a strike was imminent, the police warned both the management of the dome and the organizers of the display. The heist began shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning, with the thieves unaware that the diamonds had been switched with crystal replicas the night before. They crashed through the perimeter fence and into the dome, aiming for their prize. But as they reached in to grab it, officers disguised as cleaners bellowed at the gang to raise their hands. Trapped inside the vault, 2 of the thieves lay down on the floor. Outside, 2 others were already in handcuffs. Armed police also seized one member of the gang next to the speedboat and arrested another in a van. Although the police were armed, not a shot was fired. The gang may have been caught red-handed, but the trial took 3 months, and the jury conducted 35 hours of deliberations to convict them, and even then by a majority verdict, not a unanimous one. The thieves were sentenced to a combined 71 years in prison. In retrospect, even the robbers conceded that their plan was as absurd as it was daring in its scale. One told the court, "It seemed almost plausible at the time. Now, it seems like an absolutely crazy thing to do."
Unit 10, page 122. Listening. Exercise 2.
Paula, welcome to the studio today. Now, you run what is considered by those who know what they're talking about to be a very successful advertising agency. What inspired you to enter the world of advertising?
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that, but I suppose I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur. Not the ruthless kind, of course. I'm certainly not very artistic, never have been, but I have an eye for design, and although I've certainly never had the gift of the gab, I can argue my way out of a corner and get my own way.
But success didn't come overnight, did it?
Not at all. But it hasn't all been hard grind. I started at the bottom and gradually worked my way up, but I can't say I didn't enjoy it along the way. I've had my ups and a few downs too, but in this field, you've just got to pick yourself up and start all over again.
How would you say that the world of advertising compares to working in other fields?
Working in advertising's certainly tougher, make no mistake. It's often said in advertising that you're only as good as your last idea. In reality, you're only as good as your next one. Our business is different because it constantly has to break with the past. This need for reinvention obviously affects the industry's culture. There can be very few industries that are expected to have a new idea every day.
But is there any evidence to back up what you are saying?
There's plenty of proof that you can't rely on past achievements. A quick glance at advertising shows that the industry is littered with campaigns that stayed around too long and ended up damaging the brand. So much so that the brand often disappears forever. A problem one famous and highly successful fashion company encountered in its last campaign.
So, what steps can you take to ensure your long-term survival?
Well, the only way to ensure your long-term survival, as you so aptly put it, is relentless investment in talent and opportunity, and a constant questioning of one's past, the desire to break with what you've created, and the courage to start again. The, if it worked yesterday, it certainly won't work tomorrow sort of philosophy. For example, for most brands, the general thinking is that a strong heritage is considered an asset, a competitive advantage. And on the surface, there doesn't seem anything wrong with that. But it's the conventional view, and it presents advertising agencies with an interesting dilemma. How do they succeed as brands? We are, perhaps, an industry that can be trapped by our past glory. Just as a shark has to keep swimming to survive, an agency has to keep evolving to succeed. It has no fixed assets, no past equity to trade, and, in reality, very little goodwill.
So, all in all, would you recommend the industry as a career?
Overall, I would say it's an industry for newcomers. It's an environment where the newcomer is regarded with greater relevance than anything else. And this is probably because, as an industry, we're obsessed with youth. A 50-year-old creative is an increasing rarity. Or, if they're still employed, they're consigned to some branch office in the back of beyond. We're in an industry where, for good or bad, history is suspect and the future is the prize. Of course, any business has to look to tomorrow, especially in facing today's relentless competition. But advertising must uniquely be an industry that has to forget about its past in order to ensure its future.
Paula, thanks for talking to us today. And now, for
Page 123. Speaking. Exercise 2. 1.
I don't think an ad on the radio would be very effective.
That's rubbish. It's a very good idea.
2.
This isn't a very effective way of advertising anything. Nobody reads what's on a board like this, or even remembers what product's being advertised, do they?
No.
3.
This, how is this called in English?
Oh, it's called junk mail, I think. Things that you don't want that come through your letterbox.
4.
If you ask me, advertising in a magazine is an excellent way of reaching a large section of the public.
It's expensive, but you're right. I'm sure it pays off.
Unit 11. Page 134. Listening. Exercise 3.
Inside an office complex near San Francisco, one of the 10 most powerful computers in the world hums and blinks in a dark glass chamber. Known as the render farm, the computer represents the final stage in a Pixar movie. It takes the millions of equations that the studio's animators have created to control each character and crunches them down into individual frames of film. Pixar are now one of the most successful film studios in the history of the cinema. But Pixar employees become visibly disturbed by the suggestion that sheer computing power might be the secret of what is to their rivals their puzzling success. In Hollywood, though, trying to figure out Pixar's secret has become a matter of panicky necessity. Since 1995, the company has had an unbroken record of triumphs, as popular with critics as the box office. This has resulted in not just 7, but a staggering 17 Oscars and millions of dollars for the studio. Telling a story in animated form requires a particularly bizarre kind of personality, an equal mix of childishness and enormous quantities of patience. Employees admit that it is a tedious job. They work on something for 2 years for maybe less than 2 minutes of film. If you're not a patient kind of person, you just can't take it. And obsessive secrecy characterizes the studio's attitude to its future releases, so it is impossible for animators to talk about what they're working on now. What they can tell you, however, is that it is so difficult to create animated characters which are realistic that it is pointless even trying. Computer animation's best characters are strictly symbolic representations. This is probably because profound emotions are not always best conveyed by characters who appear to be real creatures. Strangely enough, for a company that appears to have discovered some kind of magic formula, their film, The Incredibles, seems to dispense with everything it has done before. This is because the main characters are all human, rather than animals or other creatures. The film also lasts for 2 full hours, and many shots are slow or completely still. But what will surprise viewers most of all is not the story, but the message the film sends out. Every Pixar film has a message, and in this film it seems to be that some people are just better than others, and their resentful inferiors should just accept the fact that this is the way things are. The Pixar doctrine seems to be that if a story really is good enough, it will reach everybody, not just children, and even the jokes that younger viewers miss will somehow enhance their experience of the film. Children live in an adult world and are used to hearing things they don't understand. So part of what makes life interesting is trying to figure things out. So putting things like jokes they don't understand in a movie is fine. Overall, what is special about Pixar is that their appeal is universal, and somehow it seems that they can do no wrong.
Page 135. Speaking. Exercise 2.
You will each have the same set of pictures to look at, but your pictures are in a different order. They show groups of people watching different kinds of entertainment. Please do not show your pictures to each other. Anna, I'd like you to describe 2 or 3 of these pictures, saying why the people might have chosen to watch these kinds of entertainment and how different their reactions to the entertainment might be.
Exercise 3.
Well, these people obviously enjoy going to the theater. They probably find a live performance much more exciting than watching a play on television. On the other hand, the spectators at the basketball match must enjoy supporting their team, together with all the other fans. As for the atmosphere in each case, well, it's completely different. At the theater, you must be quiet as a member of the audience. Everyone is concentrating on what the actors are doing. But at a basketball match, you can stand up and feel like you're taking part in the match on the court yourself. That's part of the fun.
Unit 12, page 146. Listening. Exercise 2. Speaker 1.
It's common knowledge that the world's oil and gas supplies aren't inexhaustible, so I was prepared to accept the fact that this nuclear power station needed to be built, and this was as good a place as any to site it. It doesn't particularly worry me that this source of energy is expensive to produce. Let's face it, we just have to put up with that. What is much more problematic is how to get rid of the byproduct. It can remain highly toxic for years, and, as we know to our cost, accidents can devastate huge areas. Once we crack the problem of disposing of that, I think there'll be less opposition to the use of nuclear power.
Speaker 2.
At first, I was dead against the whole idea. I thought anyone who supported anything to do with nuclear power wasn't worth giving the time of day to. The ironic thing is that from what I've heard on the news recently, it seems this kind of energy turns out to be something that can have less harmful effects on the environment than we thought, which is a bit of an eye-opener, to tell the truth. But I suppose that one of the reservations I still have about it is that there are so many other energy sources that remain untapped as yet. So I say, let's go for those.
Speaker 3.
I started out thinking that this anti-nuclear power movement was a lot of fuss about nothing. As far as I was concerned, as long as I had heating and lighting, I didn't care a hoot about how it reached me. I was far too busy with the nitty-gritty of getting through the week, if you understand me. But when it's a question of in your own backyard, you start to ask yourself a few questions about what right we have to interfere with this beautiful world we live in. Maybe we should stop now before we destroy it completely. Well, let's face it. What difference does it make what I think?
Speaker 4.
I knew, which I'm sure a lot of people don't, that nuclear power plants emit virtually no greenhouse gases. Apparently, if all the existing nuclear power plants were shut down and replaced with equally powerful energy from non-nuclear sources, there would be a huge increase in the amount of pollution in the atmosphere. It's a sobering thought, and a powerful argument for nuclear power, isn't it? But living down the road from a nuclear power station, or any other kind of power station, is another matter. Ultimately, it makes the area an undesirable location for residents.
Speaker 5.
I must admit that in the beginning I was pretty ignorant about what using nuclear power really meant. I thought it might create employment in the area, but that's about all. But from what I've read since, it seems that one of the biggest objections to the siting of nuclear power stations is that the local people aren't consulted. In our case, nothing could have been further from the truth. Everyone got sent a letter outlining the proposal, and there were countless follow-up meetings, where, incidentally, usually only a handful of people turned up. But the point is that however open people are about what nuclear power means in the long run, there's still that unknown quantity in terms of what effect it might have.
Page 147. Speaking. Exercise 4.
Imagine that there is a large disused area of land in your town. Here are some ideas for redeveloping it. Talk to each other about the benefits and drawbacks of these ideas for redeveloping the disused area of land. Then decide which two would be in the best interests of the town's inhabitants.
So, shall we start with the blocks of flats?
Why not? Sorry, I've forgotten what you asked us to do.
Talk to each other about the benefits and drawbacks of these ideas for redeveloping the disused area of land. Then decide which two would be in the best interests of the town's inhabitants.
Oh, yes. Well, the idea of providing housing would certainly appeal to most people, although I am not sure if everyone would want to live in flats like these.
Yes, I see what you mean. The housing would certainly be needed if the area is being redeveloped, so the flats might be very welcome. But maybe people would like something more attractive in the area as well.
Yes. And also by building even more flats, you increase the numbers of people living in the area. And there will be more cars and more congestion, so more housing may not be in the best interests of the inhabitants.
Good point. Actually, in my opinion, the skateboard park might be an idea worth considering. It would certainly encourage people to come and enjoy themselves, and everyone seems to be interested in sport, don't you think?
Well, most people are, I suppose. And that would definitely be one reason for choosing the skateboard park. But let's think about the others before we make a decision, shall we?
Of course. What about this one? A theme park. That would be something completely different, wouldn't it? It would be great for young people and the rest of the community.
I'm afraid I don't really agree with you at all. Theme parks are noisy and they don't really appeal to everybody. Maybe the idea of a museum and art gallery would appeal to more people and be more useful for the community as a whole. For schools, educational visits and so on.
Actually, I don't think the museum or art gallery would be as much fun as a theme park. Have we still got more time?